Whispers of U.S. Space Command monitoring civilians are now sparking serious debate within defense and privacy communities. The agency, tasked with military operations in space, may soon play a controversial role here on Earth. While its core mission is to safeguard American interests in orbit, new technologies may expand its influence downward. Military satellites have long scanned the globe, but civilian data collection marks an entirely different ethical and legal territory. Concerns are mounting that surveillance tools once reserved for enemy tracking could be aimed at average citizens instead. This dramatic shift stems from growing fears over space-based threats and asymmetric warfare emerging from adversaries like China and Russia. Officials argue broader monitoring is needed to identify unconventional threats originating from within civilian networks. Cyber attacks, drone incursions, and even coordinated misinformation campaigns may now fall within Space Command's jurisdiction. Critics, however, argue the transition risks eroding civil liberties and violating privacy laws meant to protect Americans. Space Command's expanding role was highlighted in recent Pentagon discussions about integrating satellite surveillance with domestic intelligence agencies. While no formal civilian surveillance program exists yet, documents suggest pilot programs may already be under quiet development. Some of these programs involve machine learning algorithms identifying unusual patterns in civilian movement or communication behavior. This fusion of AI and satellite data raises alarms among legal experts and privacy advocates alike. The Fourth Amendment, protecting against unreasonable searches, could be tested in unprecedented ways by space-based monitoring. Experts question whether satellite data collection bypasses current legal definitions of a warrant or reasonable suspicion. Proponents claim that enhanced monitoring would only target potential national security risks, not general civilian behavior. Still, drawing that line clearly is difficult without real transparency or oversight from independent agencies. Aerospace firms collaborating with Space Command are reportedly building advanced optics capable of capturing granular detail from orbit. These sensors may track everything from heat signatures to car movements, making their civilian use deeply controversial. In 2023, a leaked internal memo from a defense contractor hinted at behavioral mapping being tested in urban areas. This mapping could visualize civilian routines and detect disruptions potentially linked to hostile influence or pre-attack staging. Civil rights groups responded quickly, warning that such capabilities amount to a military version of domestic surveillance. U.S. Space Command denied that these tools were active in any public-facing applications, but didn't rule out classified projects. The potential involvement of SpaceX, a frequent Space Command partner, adds another layer of intrigue to the story. Elon Musk's satellites through Starlink already provide vital communications infrastructure for military operations. Speculation is rising that dual-use agreements could allow Starlink data to support surveillance functions indirectly. Musk has previously stated Starlink is a civilian service, but U.S. military contracts tell a more complex story. In Ukraine, Starlink was crucial in battlefield communication, showcasing its potential in unconventional intelligence operations. With over 5,000 Starlink satellites in orbit, real-time data collection at a global scale is now technologically feasible. This raises ethical dilemmas. Should civilian infrastructure become a tool for military intelligence or remain strictly separated? Department of Defense officials insist that any expansion of surveillance capabilities will comply with existing U.S. laws. However, existing laws weren't designed for space-based AI tools interpreting massive volumes of behavioral data. The Biden administration has remained largely silent on the issue, prompting watchdog groups to demand formal investigations. At the heart of the controversy lies the question of consent. Do Americans know what they're potentially being exposed to? Satellites have no borders, meaning one system can simultaneously monitor military and civilian environments without distinction. Some legal scholars argue that space doesn't fall under traditional jurisdiction, complicating efforts to regulate satellite surveillance. International treaties like the Outer Space Treaty prohibit weapons in orbit, but remain vague on data-gathering ethics. Meanwhile, adversaries like China are reportedly investing in similar tech, creating pressure for the US to respond aggressively. In this technological arms race, the line between defense and intrusion becomes increasingly difficult to draw. NASA, historically civilian-focused, has also been asked to contribute data analysis tools developed for Earth science missions. Although NASA's involvement is minor, critics fear it legitimizes the blending of peaceful research with defense agendas. Some senators have begun pushing for legislation requiring transparency in any space-based data collection affecting civilians. Others warn that revealing too much could compromise national security or tip off adversaries about US capabilities. It's a delicate balance. Transparency invites trust, but also opens the door to security vulnerabilities and political fallout. Retired generals have voiced support for enhanced monitoring, citing the need to anticipate unconventional threats before they escalate. Still, public trust in government surveillance remains low after years of revelations from whistleblowers like Edward Snowden. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency may play a key role, given its expertise in interpreting satellite imagery. They've already tested AI tools that flag anomalous movement patterns in high-risk areas using orbital platforms. Whether such tools should monitor domestic cities, however, is a decision fraught with ethical and legal consequences. AI doesn't distinguish intent, it highlights deviation, which could misidentify innocent behavior as suspicious. False positives could lead to unnecessary investigations, harassment, or worse, violating rights without due process. Military proponents counter that doing nothing leaves the US vulnerable to hybrid threats blending physical and digital tactics. Satellite AI has already proven useful in disaster response, showing potential to detect developing emergencies before they strike. Proponents argue that such dual-use tech could save lives if implemented carefully and governed responsibly. Nonetheless, carefully and responsibly often depend on political will and long-term legal infrastructure. Without strong civilian oversight, surveillance tools risk being used arbitrarily or without meaningful recourse for the public. Even within military circles, there's debate over how far Space Command's jurisdiction should extend. Some believe the agency should remain focused exclusively on orbital threats, leaving domestic issues to other departments. Others argue that modern threats don't respect boundaries, requiring equally boundaryless surveillance capabilities. This mission creep is what alarms many experts. Space defense bleeding into Earth-based civilian monitoring without consent. Legal institutions are now racing to interpret constitutional rights in an era of orbital observation and algorithmic suspicion. Digital rights organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation have called for immediate hearings on the issue. Congress may soon face pressure to enact new privacy protections before any program reaches national scale. Meanwhile, defense contractors continue innovating quietly, spurred by billions in funding and vague oversight requirements. Public access to satellite data remains limited, making accountability nearly impossible for ordinary citizens. The more advanced the technology becomes, the easier it is to justify its use in the name of national security. Yet even high-tech surveillance can't replace community-based intelligence, which still plays a critical role in homeland defense. Technological dependency can lead to blind spots, especially if AI systems are over-trusted or fed biased datasets. Lawmakers must weigh the risks of overreach against the cost of underpreparedness in a rapidly shifting threat environment. Ultimately, the American public deserves to understand the capabilities, intentions, and boundaries of its own defense agencies. If US Space Command is to monitor civilians, that conversation must be had openly, with public participation and legal accountability. The outcome of this debate may set a precedent for how democracies handle surveillance in the space age. Space is no longer a distant frontier. It's now directly entangled with terrestrial governance and individual rights. Whether this entanglement becomes protective or oppressive depends on the choices made today by leaders and citizens alike.